Sometimes the cruelest prison is the life other people choose for you. Sophia Mitchell stood alone beneath the silver light of the full moon as the last guests drifted away from the mating ceremony, their whispers following her long after their footsteps disappeared into the cold mountain night. Only an hour earlier, she had believed destiny would finally erase the loneliness that had defined her life as a rejected Omega. Instead, the man the moon had once marked as her destined mate had publicly renounced the bond before the entire pack, declaring that he would rather remain unmated forever than spend a single day beside someone as insignificant as her. The words echoed through her heart with every slow breath she took. No one had defended her. No one had questioned him. They simply watched another rejected Omega become a lesson for everyone else. By sunrise, every family in Silver Ridge Pack would know her name for all the wrong reasons. Sophia quietly gathered the small cloth bag that held everything she owned and began walking away from the village. Snow covered the narrow trail leading toward the forest, soft enough to hide her footsteps, as though even the earth wished to spare her from being followed. She did not cry. She had exhausted her tears years ago, after learning that kindness alone could never earn respect from those who had already decided her worth. The only thing left inside her was exhaustion. She no longer dreamed of finding happiness. She only wanted peace. Before reaching the edge of the forest, she stopped beside a weathered wooden notice board where traders and travelers often left announcements. One faded parchment caught her attention. It was unusually simple. A widowed caretaker sought a wife for his crippled nephew, a quiet man living alone in a cabin nearly 15 miles beyond the northern ridge. No dowry was required. No family name was requested. Only one sentence had been written beneath the offer. Someone willing to build an honest home will always be welcomed. Sophia stared at those words far longer than she expected. There was no promise of love, no promise of wealth, only the possibility of beginning again somewhere no one knew her story. By the following afternoon, she stood outside a small chapel surrounded by towering pine trees, wearing the same modest dress she had worn the day before. The ceremony was so quiet that only the elderly minister, the caretaker, and the groom stood waiting. When Sophia finally looked toward the man she had agreed to marry, she found him leaning lightly upon a carved wooden cane. He appeared a few years older than she was, with neatly combed dark hair, thoughtful blue eyes, and a calm expression untouched by self-pity. His movements were careful, suggesting an old injury rather than weakness, and despite the difficult mountain path outside, he carried himself with quiet dignity. "My name is Ethan," he said gently, offering a respectful smile instead of reaching for her hand. "Thank you for coming." The simple kindness in his voice surprised Sophia more than any grand declaration ever could. She returned a small, uncertain smile. "I am Sophia." The ceremony lasted only a few minutes. There were no celebrations, no music, and no cheering crowd. When it ended, the elderly minister wished them peace before quietly closing the chapel doors behind them. Together, Sophia and Ethan began walking toward the lonely cabin waiting beyond the snow-covered forest. Neither of them spoke very much. Yet for reasons she could not explain, the silence beside this quiet stranger felt far gentler than all the voices she had left behind. The journey to the cabin took nearly 2 hours through snow-covered trails that wound between towering pine trees and frozen streams. Yet neither Sophia Mitchell nor Ethan spoke more than a few words along the way. Their silence never felt awkward. It simply reflected two people carrying different burdens neither knew how to explain. Sophia occasionally glanced toward Ethan whenever the narrow path became uneven. He leaned upon his carved wooden cane with practiced movements, never asking for assistance and never complaining about the slow pace. Whenever she quietly slowed her own steps to match his, he noticed but said nothing, acknowledging the gesture only with a grateful smile. As the afternoon sunlight faded behind the mountains, a modest log cabin appeared beyond the trees. Smoke drifted lazily from a stone chimney, and a small wooden porch overlooked a frozen meadow where deer tracks crossed the untouched snow. It was far smaller than Sophia had imagined, but something about the warm light glowing through the windows made the lonely place feel unexpectedly welcoming. Ethan opened the front door and stepped aside before entering himself. "Welcome home," he said softly. The simple words caught Sophia by surprise. No place had felt like home for many years. Inside, The cabin was clean and carefully organized. A fire crackled inside the stone fireplace, filling the room with gentle warmth. Shelves lined one wall, holding dozens of neatly arranged books whose leather bindings suggested they had been read many times. A sturdy oak table stood near the kitchen, where fresh bread, dried herbs, and a steaming kettle waited as though someone had prepared for their arrival long before today. Sophia looked around in quiet disbelief. She had expected hardship. Instead, she found peace. Ethan carefully removed his winter coat before hanging it beside the door. "I hope it is comfortable," he said. "It is not much, but everything here is yours as well." Sophia turned toward him. "You prepared all of this?" He nodded. A home should make someone feel welcome before it asks anything in return. His answer lingered in her thoughts. During the years she had lived among her own pack, she had rarely heard kindness expressed so naturally. There was no attempt to impress her, no expectation of gratitude, only quiet sincerity. Ethan walked toward the kitchen with measured steps and poured 2 cups of warm herbal tea. As he handed one to Sophia, he noticed her studying the bookshelves. "You enjoy reading?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Whenever the weather keeps me indoors." Sophia approached the shelves, surprised to find volumes on history, diplomacy, architecture, medicine, astronomy, and ancient pack traditions. Many were expensive editions usually found only in noble households or large libraries. She gently traced one leather spine with her fingertips before looking back at Ethan. "These are remarkable books." Ethan glanced toward them with quiet affection. They had been good company over the years. She wanted to ask how a man living alone in a remote cabin had collected such an extraordinary library, but stopped herself. Everyone deserved the right to keep certain parts of their past private. Instead, she carried her tea toward the window overlooking the snowy meadow. For the first time since her public rejection, she felt her breathing become steady again. No whispers reached this place. No accusing eyes followed her every step. Only the gentle sound of the fireplace and the peaceful silence of falling snow surrounded the little cabin. As evening settled over the forest, Ethan quietly placed another log upon the fire before speaking once more. "Sophia," he said with calm sincerity, "I do not expect you to become comfortable here overnight. Take all the time you need. This house will never ask you to earn your place in it." She looked into the dancing firelight, feeling something inside her begin to heal in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. Morning arrived quietly over the northern ridge, and the first rays of sunlight spilled across the frozen meadow beyond the cabin windows. Sophia Mitchell awoke to the comforting scent of fresh bread and cedar wood burning softly in the fireplace. For a brief moment, she forgot everything that had happened during the previous 2 days. Then the memories returned, not with the sharp pain she expected, but with a strange sense of distance, as though the life she had left behind already belonged to someone else. She wrapped a wool blanket around her shoulders and stepped into the main room, where Ethan Blackwood was carefully placing warm bread, honey, and herbal tea on the oak table. He leaned lightly on his carved cane while moving about the kitchen with practiced ease, never appearing frustrated by the slower pace his injury required. When he noticed Sophia, he greeted her with the same gentle smile he had worn since they first met. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you slept well." Sophia nodded. "Better than I have in a very long time." Ethan pulled out a chair for her before taking his own seat across the table. They shared breakfast in comfortable silence, interrupted only by small conversations about the snowfall, the nearby forest, and the chores that would prepare the cabin for the coming weeks. There was no pressure to fill every quiet moment with words. Somehow, that made every sentence feel more sincere. After breakfast, Sophia insisted on helping organize the pantry. As she carefully arranged jars of dried herbs and flour along the wooden shelves, she noticed that nearly every container had been labeled in elegant handwriting. The names were written with remarkable precision, accompanied by small notes describing where each herb had been gathered and the best season to use it. "You have beautiful handwriting," she said. Ethan looked over from where he was repairing a lantern beside the window. "My tutor was very patient," he answered before pausing, as though he had revealed more than he intended. Sophia looked at him curiously. "You had a tutor?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Many years ago." He returned to his work without offering further explanation. Later that afternoon, Sophia selected one of the books from the shelf while Ethan rested near the fireplace. She expected a collection of simple stories, but instead found detailed discussions of diplomacy between neighboring packs, treaties that stretched back generations, and careful observations about leadership during difficult times. She glanced toward Ethan in surprise. These subjects are unusual. He closed the book he had been reading and nodded. Understanding people has always interested me more than judging them. His answer lingered in Sophia's thoughts long after the conversation ended. Throughout the day, she noticed other small details that seemed strangely out of place. Ethan spoke with effortless confidence about distant territories most ordinary travelers had never visited. He knew the customs of noble families, recognized the seals carved into ancient maps, and discussed history as though he had witnessed it rather than merely studied it. Yet he never spoke with pride. He offered every thought with quiet humility, inviting conversation instead of admiration. By evening, the snow outside had begun falling again, covering the forest in a blanket of white. Sophia stood beside the window watching the flakes drift gently through the fading light. She had married a man the world considered broken, expecting to spend the rest of her life caring for someone who had lost everything. Instead, she found herself living beside a person whose wisdom, kindness, and quiet dignity seemed far greater than anything she had known before. She could not explain it, but with every passing hour one question grew more difficult to ignore. Who was Ethan Blackwood before this lonely cabin became his home? Several peaceful days passed beneath quiet skies, and the little cabin slowly settled into a comforting rhythm that neither Sophia Mitchell nor Ethan Blackwood ever spoke about, but both quietly appreciated. Every morning began with fresh bread, warm tea, and the gentle crackling of the fireplace. Every afternoon brought simple chores that somehow felt meaningful when shared together. Sophia gathered herbs along the edge of the forest while Ethan carefully repaired shelves, sharpened tools, or tended the small vegetable garden protected beneath wooden frames from the winter frost. She noticed that although he depended on his carved cane for longer walks, he never allowed his injury to become an excuse for avoiding responsibility. Whenever she offered to carry something heavy, he thanked her with genuine warmth, but always insisted on doing whatever he could himself. The quiet dignity with which he lived made it impossible to pity him. Instead, she found herself respecting him more each day. One crisp afternoon, Sophia returned from collecting firewood and froze as unfamiliar voices echoed from outside the cabin. A group of riders wearing the colors of her former pack had stopped near the front gate after recognizing her. Their expensive winter cloaks contrasted sharply with the humble cabin standing alone beneath the towering pines. One of them laughed loudly enough for the entire valley to hear. So the rejected Omega really disappeared into the wilderness. Another glanced toward Ethan as he stepped calmly onto the porch with his cane resting lightly against the wooden floorboards. And this must be the cripple willing to marry the woman no one else wanted. Their laughter drifted across the snowy clearing. Sophia lowered her eyes, the old shame threatening to return despite everything she had begun rebuilding inside herself. For a brief moment, she feared Ethan would regret the decision that had brought her into his quiet life. Instead, he remained perfectly composed. His expression never hardened. His voice never rose. He simply stepped beside Sophia rather than in front of her, allowing her to stand as his equal instead of someone needing to be hidden. "Good afternoon," Ethan said politely. "The roads are difficult this time of year. I hope your journey has been safe." The unexpected courtesy seemed to confuse the visitors more than any angry reply could have. One rider shook his head with a mocking smile. "You should have chosen a healthier wife if you wanted respect." Ethan met the man's eyes without the slightest trace of resentment. Respect is not something a person receives because of appearance. It is something each of us chooses to give. His calm answer left the clearing strangely silent. Sophia noticed something even more surprising. The horses that had been restless only moments before gradually became still. Even the loudest visitor unconsciously straightened his posture while looking at Ethan, as though responding to an authority he could not quite explain. The strange moment passed almost immediately. Embarrassed by the silence they had created, the riders exchanged uneasy glances before offering a few careless remarks and turning their horses back toward the mountain trail. They disappeared into the falling snow without another word. Sophia remained standing beside Ethan long after the sound of hooves faded into the distance. "Why did you stay so calm?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked across the frozen meadow where fresh snow had already begun covering the rider's tracks. Because another person's opinion cannot decide who we are unless we hand that power to them. Sophia studied his peaceful expression, once again sensing that his quiet wisdom came from a life far larger than the one he allowed the world to see. Somewhere beneath the humility, the careful manners, and the weathered cane, Ethan carried himself with the effortless confidence of someone who had once been born to lead. And for the first time, Sophia wondered whether destiny had hidden far more inside this lonely cabin than either of them had yet revealed. 3 more days passed beneath quiet winter skies, and life inside the little cabin settled into a peaceful routine that almost made Sophia Mitchell believe she had finally escaped the painful memories of her old pack. Each sunrise found her preparing breakfast while Ethan Blackwood carefully tended the fireplace or swept fresh snow from the front porch with slow, deliberate movements. He never rushed. He never complained. Even leaning upon his carved wooden cane, he carried himself with a calm confidence that made every ordinary task seem quietly purposeful. One cold afternoon, while Sophia was hanging freshly washed blankets beneath the pale winter sun, she noticed a flock of ravens suddenly lifting from the pine trees beyond the meadow. Moments later, a distant rhythm echoed across the frozen valley. It was not thunder. It was the steady sound of horses approaching in perfect formation. Sophia shaded her eyes and looked toward the narrow trail leading through the forest. Dark figures slowly emerged between the towering pines, each rider wearing polished silver armor beneath deep blue cloaks embroidered with the ancient crest of the royal pack. Their horses moved with remarkable discipline, covering nearly a quarter mile without breaking formation. Sophia had only heard stories about the Royal Guard during her childhood. They served no ordinary alpha and answered only to the ruler of every allied pack. Her heart immediately began racing. "Ethan," she called softly as she stepped onto the porch. He looked up from repairing a wooden chair and quietly followed her gaze toward the approaching riders. Unlike Sophia, he showed no surprise. His expression remained calm, almost thoughtful, as though he had expected this moment to arrive sooner or later. Within minutes, nearly 24 mounted guards stopped before the cabin. Their commander, an older man with silver threaded through his dark hair, climbed from his horse and walked across the snow with measured steps. Sophia instinctively moved closer to Ethan, uncertain whether the visitors had come searching for someone dangerous or simply lost their way through the mountains. The commander stopped several feet away. For one long heartbeat, complete silence settled across the clearing. Then, without hesitation, the veteran warrior lowered himself onto one knee. Every guard behind him immediately followed, their armor glimmering beneath the afternoon sunlight as they bowed their heads in perfect unison. Sophia stared in complete disbelief. She looked from the kneeling soldiers to Ethan, unable to understand what she was witnessing. The commander finally spoke, his voice carrying quiet respect rather than fear. "Your Majesty," he said, "we have searched every northern territory for weeks. The Royal Council requests your return." Time itself seemed to stop. Sophia slowly turned toward the man standing beside her. Ethan's posture had not changed. His cane still rested lightly against the porch floor. His expression remained as gentle as ever. Yet somehow the entire atmosphere surrounding him had transformed. The quiet humility she had mistaken for ordinary kindness now carried the unmistakable weight of effortless authority. He looked toward the commander before speaking in the same calm voice she had heard every morning across their breakfast table. "Rise, Commander Hayes." The officer obeyed immediately without question. Ethan then glanced toward Sophia, whose eyes searched his face for an explanation that refused to come. She remembered the expensive books, the flawless handwriting, the knowledge of diplomacy, the effortless composure before her former pack, and the quiet confidence that had never seemed to fit the life of an isolated cripple. Every impossible detail suddenly aligned into a truth too extraordinary to deny. The gentle stranger she had married to escape a lifetime of shame was not an ordinary man hiding from the world. He was the Alpha King the entire kingdom had been searching for. The royal guards quietly returned to their feet, but none of them dared to speak again until Ethan Blackwood acknowledged them with a slight nod. The winter wind drifted across the frozen meadow, carrying only the soft rustling of pine branches. Sophia Mitchell remained motionless beside him, her heart struggling to reconcile the gentle man who had shared tea with her each morning and the ruler every warrior before her now honored without hesitation. Ethan slowly turned toward her, and the warmth in his blue eyes remained exactly the same. Nothing about his expression suggested pride or superiority. If anything, there was quiet regret. "Sophia," he said gently, "you deserve the truth." She searched his face, unable to find even a trace of the stranger she thought she should now be seeing. "You are the Alpha King?" she whispered. Ethan gave a small nod. "My full name is Ethan Blackwood Ashford. Several months ago, members of my own royal council betrayed their oath. They wanted a king they could control instead of one who believed every pact deserved justice under the same law. When their plan failed, they spread word that I had disappeared. I chose not to return immediately." Commander Hayes lowered his head respectfully. "Your Majesty believed revealing himself too soon would place innocent people in danger while the conspiracy remained hidden." Ethan continued calmly. "The injury to my leg was real. During my recovery, I discovered something unexpected. Once people believed I was weak, they showed me who they truly were. Some offered kindness without expecting anything in return. Others measured a person's worth only by strength, wealth, or title. I realized that if I returned to the throne immediately, I would never know whom I could genuinely trust." Sophia listened in silence as every conversation they had shared inside the cabin suddenly carried new meaning. The books, the knowledge of diplomacy, the quiet confidence, his perfect manners, even the way he had spoken to the riders from her former pack without anger. None of it had been an act. It had simply been the character of a man who had never needed to prove his authority because he had always possessed it. Ethan stepped closer, still leaning lightly upon his carved cane. "When I placed the notice seeking a wife, I expected no one to answer. Certainly not someone who had every reason to distrust the world." His voice softened even more. "You entered this home believing you were accepting less than you deserved. Yet from the first day, you treated me with dignity. You never pitied me. You never asked what power I once held. You simply chose kindness." Sophia lowered her eyes, overwhelmed not by the revelation of his crown, but by the realization that he had noticed every small gesture she believed had gone unseen. "I only did what anyone should do," she said quietly. Ethan smiled. "If that were true, neither of us would have been standing alone when we first met." The words settled gently between them. Commander Hayes respectfully waited several steps away, allowing the conversation to continue uninterrupted. Finally he spoke. "Your Majesty, the royal court is prepared for your return whenever you give the order. The council members who remained loyal have protected the kingdom in your absence, but they have refused to crown another ruler." Ethan looked toward the distant mountains before turning back to Sophia. "I will return," he said calmly, "but I will not leave without my wife. I made my vows before the moon, and no throne is more important than keeping them." Sophia felt tears gather in her eyes. Not because she had discovered she had married a king, but because even after revealing the greatest secret of his life, Ethan still spoke to her with the same quiet respect that had welcomed her into a lonely cabin and slowly taught her that she had always been worthy of being treated with kindness. Sophia Mitchell barely noticed when the royal guards quietly withdrew to the edge of the clearing, giving their king the privacy he had silently requested. The winter afternoon seemed strangely unchanged. Snow still drifted lazily through the towering pines. Smoke still curled gently from the stone chimney. The cabin remained exactly as it had been an hour earlier. Only Sophia's understanding of the man beside her had been transformed forever. She looked toward Ethan Blackwood Ashford, searching for signs that she should suddenly treat him differently. Yet he was still leaning upon the same carved wooden cane. His winter coat was still dusted with fresh snow. His smile still carried the same quiet warmth that had welcomed her into this home on the day they married. "Why are you looking at me that way?" Ethan asked softly. Sophia lowered her eyes for a moment before answering. "Because I do not know whether I am speaking to my husband or to the Alpha King." Ethan stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. "You have never met the king without first knowing the husband," he replied. "Nothing about me changed today except what you learned." His words settled gently inside her heart. She thought back to every morning they had shared breakfast beside the fireplace, every quiet conversation over tea, every kind gesture that had slowly rebuilt the confidence she believed she had lost forever. None of those moments had depended upon a crown. They had belonged entirely to the man standing before her now. "I keep remembering everything," she admitted quietly. "The books, your handwriting, the way those writers stopped laughing when you spoke. I should have understood." Ethan shook his head with a faint smile. "I hoped you would not. I wanted at least one place where people saw me before they saw the throne." Sophia looked into his calm blue eyes and finally understood the loneliness hidden behind his gentle nature. She had believed she was the only one escaping a painful past when she accepted their marriage. In truth, Ethan had also been searching for refuge, not from enemies alone, but from a lifetime of wondering whether anyone could ever care for the man instead of the title he carried. "Were you testing me?" she asked after a long silence. Ethan answered immediately. "No." His voice remained steady. "I was protecting the only honest part of my life." He glanced toward the little cabin behind them. "If you had walked away after learning the truth, I would have accepted your decision. But I could not build a marriage upon deception forever." Sophia felt tears warm her eyes once again, though this time they carried no sadness. She slowly reached for his hand. It was warm despite the winter air, marked with small calluses from ordinary work that no king had ever been expected to do. She smiled through quiet emotion. "I did not fall in love with a crown." Ethan looked surprised. "I fell in love with the man who thanked me for entering his home, who made fresh bread every morning, who never treated me like I was broken after the world convinced me that I was." For the first time since Commander Hayes had arrived, the careful reserve Ethan always carried softened completely. His smile reached his eyes with quiet relief. He gently closed his fingers around hers, not as a ruler claiming loyalty, but as a husband grateful beyond words. Standing together beneath the falling snow, surrounded by silent pines and the peaceful cabin that had brought two wounded souls together, both of them realized that the greatest secret revealed that day was not the identity of the Alpha King. It was the simple truth that love built upon kindness remained unchanged, even after destiny uncovered everything else. The journey back to the capital began before sunrise the following morning. Fresh snow blanketed the mountain trails, and the royal guard formed a respectful escort around the small carriage that carried Ethan Blackwood Ashford and Sophia Mitchell away from the quiet cabin that had changed both of their lives. Sophia watched the little home disappear between the towering pine trees until it became only a distant shape beneath the winter sky. She had arrived there believing she was burying her future. Instead, she was leaving with a future she could never have imagined. Ethan noticed the thoughtful expression on her face and offered a gentle smile. "We can return whenever you wish," he said. "That cabin will always belong to us." Sophia nodded softly. It was the first place that ever felt safe. Ethan reached for her hand, and the simple gesture eased the uncertainty that still lingered inside her heart. Several hours later, the towers of the royal citadel rose above the snow-covered valley, their white stone walls glowing beneath the afternoon sunlight. Hundreds of banners bearing the crest of the royal pack fluttered in the cold breeze, while citizens lined the broad avenue leading toward the palace gates. Word of the Alpha King's return had spread quickly, and every face reflected relief rather than celebration alone. As Ethan stepped from the carriage, leaning lightly upon his carved cane, the gathered crowd lowered their heads in quiet respect. Yet before taking another step, he turned and offered his hand to Sophia, inviting her to walk beside him instead of behind him. She accepted with quiet gratitude. Together they crossed the palace courtyard, where members of the royal council, respected elders, and representatives from allied packs waited beneath the ancient moon arch, a marble monument said to honor bonds chosen by destiny rather than ambition. Sophia felt countless eyes upon her, and for an instant the old fear returned. She remembered standing before another crowd only days earlier, abandoned and humiliated. Ethan gently squeezed her hand as though sensing every memory without a single word being spoken. "You are not alone this time," he whispered. Those simple words gave her the courage to keep walking. As they reached the center of the courtyard, the High Elder welcomed Ethan home before turning towards Sophia with a warm expression. "The moon has witnessed many rulers," the elder said, "but every reign is strengthened by the heart beside the throne." At that very moment, a soft silver glow appeared beneath the marble arch. The light was gentle, almost like moonlight reflecting across fresh snow, and it slowly surrounded Ethan and Sophia without warmth or fear. A quiet murmur spread through the assembled crowd as delicate silver markings shimmered around their joined hands before fading into a graceful crescent-shaped symbol visible for only a heartbeat. The High Elder smiled with peaceful certainty. "The moon has spoken," he announced. "This union was never born from pity or circumstance. It was written long before either of them knew the path they would walk." Complete silence settled across the courtyard. Those who had doubted Sophia's place lowered their eyes in humble respect, while the elders exchanged knowing smiles that carried generations of ancient understanding. Sophia looked at Ethan in astonishment. He simply smiled back, his eyes filled not with surprise, but with quiet gratitude. "I told you once that kindness reveals who people truly are," he said softly. "Now the moon has revealed what my heart already knew." Standing beneath the winter sky, surrounded by a kingdom witnessing destiny unfold with gentle certainty, Sophia realized that the greatest honor she had received was not the promise of becoming a queen. It was the confirmation that the compassion she had shown inside a lonely mountain cabin had always been leading her toward the place where she truly belonged. The weeks that followed transformed the royal citadel in quiet but unmistakable ways. The great halls that had once echoed with uncertainty now carried a renewed sense of hope as Ethan Blackwood Ashford resumed his responsibilities with the same calm wisdom Sophia Mitchell had come to know inside the little mountain cabin. He listened before speaking. He thanked servants by name. He welcomed every petition with patience rather than pride. Watching him upon the throne, Sophia realized there had never been two different men. The gentle husband who had baked fresh bread at sunrise, and the Alpha King who guided an entire kingdom had always been one and the same. News of the moon's blessing spread quickly across every allied pack, eventually reaching Silver Ridge, where the people who had witnessed Sophia's rejection gathered once more beneath the same ceremonial platform where her life had seemed to end only weeks earlier. This time the atmosphere was entirely different. The elders quietly admitted that they had accepted appearances instead of seeking truth. Families who had ignored Sophia now spoke her name with respect rather than pity. Even the man who had publicly rejected their destined bond stood silently among the crowd, unable to deny what everyone had seen with their own eyes. Yet when Ethan and Sophia visited the village together during a royal goodwill journey, neither of them sought revenge or humiliation. Sophia greeted familiar faces with the same gentle kindness she had always carried, proving that compassion did not disappear simply because fortune had changed. Ethan addressed the gathered pack with steady confidence. "A kingdom grows stronger when every person is treated with dignity," he said. "Judge one another by character, never by rumor, weakness, or status." No one argued with his words because every person present had already witnessed the truth they carried. As spring slowly replaced winter, Sophia found herself returning often to the mountain cabin with Ethan whenever royal duties allowed. They would sit together on the porch overlooking the meadow, watching wildflowers replace the snow while remembering the quiet days that had first taught them to trust each other. The cabin remained untouched, filled with the same books, the same oak table, and the same comforting peace that had given two wounded hearts the courage to begin again. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the western mountains, Sophia smiled at Ethan and asked whether he ever regretted hiding his identity. He looked across the familiar valley before answering with quiet certainty. "If I had never walked away from the throne, I might have ruled a kingdom, but I would never have found the woman who reminded me that kindness is stronger than power." Sophia gently rested her hand in his, knowing those words mattered more than any royal title ever could. Above them, the first stars appeared one by one across the darkening sky, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine through the open valley. The journey that had begun with rejection, loneliness, and quiet despair had led not to revenge, but to healing. Sophia had once believed she married a cripple simply to escape her shame. Ethan had believed he needed to hide his crown to discover whom he could truly trust. Instead, both of them discovered something far greater than either had expected. They found a love built not upon destiny alone, but upon everyday acts of respect, patience, and compassion. Long after their story became a favorite tale told beside fireplaces throughout the kingdom, people rarely remembered the titles they carried. They remembered the lonely cabin in the mountains where an overlooked Omega chose kindness, a hidden king chose humility, and together they proved that true strength is always gentle, and genuine love always recognizes the heart before it ever sees the crown.